Oh, good. There's Julia. I didn't even get a response from you. I didn't know you'd be here. That's great. I was going to start at 7, but my dad just got home from the hospital, so I've been there. And so anyway, let me start share screen here, and we'll see who shows up. I know there was Kevin Davidson, I think, was supposed to come. Let me see if he's over there. Oh, he did that 33 minutes ago. Okay, let's see. I'll tell him. He may not still be online. Is that who's there? Who's there?
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, it's Kevin?
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay, well, I'll go ahead since there's a couple of y'all here. I need to record it anyway, and I won't take very long. I won't go much through the examples unless y'all want me to. But I do want to, well, I mean, I'll go through those, but I want to also talk a little bit about Chapter 7. First thing I'm going to do is talk about where I put at the end of Evernote, where I've gone down and showed you what we're going to do to the end of the semester. That's what I talked about today, because we're in the 12th week, and so I realized we really won't have time to do all 10 chapters, so we're skipping the one that says it's 8.5 and 9, but what we're going to do this week is start on Chapter 7, and today when we got to Chapter 7, I found out that one thing that it was telling you to download and install called Pygame in order to have a sound file. It causes a lot of problems, so we found a student found another file that we can use for a sound file and not have to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about that on Thursday. But right now I want to be sure that everyone understands some of these different options for Test 3 that there were, and if you turn in anything, I'm going to give you some credit, but the final, if you look down here, we're going to do Chapter 8 next week, and then we'll have another project which will be covering the GUIs, graphical user interfaces, which is what we're going to talk about in Chapter 7. And then you'll have just one of the little quizzes. It'll be 20 points over Chapter 7 and 8. And I didn't look to see which ones of you took quiz 6, but I know some people said they didn't notice it was out there, so I reopened it today until Thursday, I believe, at midnight is how long it's open if you didn't get a chance to take it. But then we'll have that one next week, and then on the 14th week, April 27th, we'll have, actually that's Monday, we'll have it on the Tuesday, I think it's the 28th, the test number 4, hands-on. And then we will start with Chapter 10, which is the last chapter in the book, and the reason I want to be sure we get that covered is it's on objects, and before you take any programming languages or scripting, you really need to understand objects and classes, so that's what that chapter's on. And so the final will just incorporate 10, and it can be in order to do 10, you're going to have to be able to do what we've done all semester. That's why when I was telling you all we would have the final could replace one of the other tests. So if you score higher than any one of the other tests, it can count for it. So if test 3 you don't do very well, and I can give some other extra credit if people don't get the grade they want, but it should, I just want to be sure that you understand these things. So we're going to go over those examples on test number 3, and I did post those, like Kevin found them, I'm assuming, because that's why you said you could go over them. But I'm going to, first of all, let's look at the problem. Oh, I thought I opened it in here. I guess I did not. That wasn't it. Oh, maybe it's... No, it's not open. Is that it? Test 3. Oh, that didn't let me open it. Anyway, let me go down here and it'll let me open it. There it is. Oh, I may have already had it. Okay, basically what we were supposed to do in this problem was use the function that I gave you, and you could, the one way that I was telling everybody to do it was to open that file that I gave to you and then add your code below the function. And so this function was all you were supposed to read in the file, put the data items into an array, and then print out the student's name, the average of the 5 GPAs that were in the file, and pass that average into this function to determine if the student was on the dean's list or academic probation. And if neither one, then it didn't print a message. So what you'll find out in this first one that I'm going to show you, this first example is the one that I did, and I went ahead and changed that function to at least say no message so you would know that it went through the function, because I didn't actually average those 5 before I put them in the data file, and I didn't realize that they come up to something that would not be in either one of these messages. So what we're going to look at is one that I did that way, and I also read the file in the way I originally coded it, which looks like, let's look at it. It doesn't actually look like it has the text on the end of it. So, oh, there it is. So here's the file. And actually, I went in and changed a couple of these during class to run it where it was values that would come up on the dean's list. But I think, let me see, I think I have the other values here, which were a little different. Let's see, there was a 3.2 and a 3. I think one of them was a 2.9 or something. But anyway, this one will run with the first one that I'm going to show you, which is this one. And so let's look at it in idle. I think I have it open. Yeah, here it is. Okay, this is the one that will run with the original file that I set up. But what you notice, and we didn't really go over this, I think I did tell the online students though that you could code the file with this encoding equals UTF-8, and then it would read this properly, because it can also be, it's read in as an ASCII file. And if you don't know the difference, you don't really have to. It's just that this is the type of encoding that Python needs in order to read this data file incorrectly without the lines at the end and different things. So this is the function the way I gave it to you all, with the exception of I put no message in here, so that if your values did not fall on either one of these, you would know that it had actually executed this function. Now, while I'm going through this, if you have a question, I can't see the chat right now, so since there's only 2 of y'all in there, I believe, you can go ahead and unmute your mic whenever, if you need to ask a question, because I won't be able to see it in the chat, and I'd be happy to if you have some questions. So here, what I start out the program with is establishing the array, and I know that because I'm using square brackets instead of the curly braces, which are a hash. Then I open the file student data. I open it student data and read it into this variable called student underscore data, or stu underscore data. Then I set up a Boolean variable that's yes or no. Boolean simply means that it can only have 2 values. And in this case, I'm using on and off, or 0 and 1. And by setting this variable up, it tells me that I'm going through this array the first time, or this loop. And when I'm going through the loop the first time, then I want to be sure and append the data as a string, because the first line of data here in my file is a string name. So what I did, I said for data in student data, if first data is the same as, you remember you have to do double equals 0, then append data to GPA and then print it out. So I'm printing out the student name first, and then I set my switch to 1 so that when I go back up to the for loop and I test this if, it won't fall into here again. It'll go down here and it'll append this 3.4 to my array as a float, which is what I want. And then it'll continue to go through the loop until it gets to the last value. And so now at this point, I have an array. And what I wanted to do on the board, let me see if I can find this so it'll record. So there it is, Sword Screen Ink. So I can draw out what the array looks like. New black screen. Okay, so what we have so far, and I didn't mean it to be so big, but it is. If we were to draw this array out, this is the array called GP, A. Kind of bad writing there. And it should have 0, 1, I'm going to make it big, 3, 4, 5, 6 positions. So this is position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So once I get through that first for loop, I have the student's name in this one. So student name, which is Sam, I didn't have room to write it in that square, is what's in the first position, 0. And then I should have those other values in here, in each one, like 3.9 and 3.7 and so forth. So that's what it actually looks like in memory. So I have to access each one of these and add them to a sum. So that's what this next part, it closes that file. I don't need it anymore. I set up a variable called sum GPA and initialized it to 0. Now you remember there were some library functions that we could use that we didn't have to write. And one of them that will always tell you the length of the array, even though I knew in my problem it was 5, it's good to set this program up so that it will run with any size of file. And so the way I did that is I said, set up a variable called length and use the function called len of the GPA and put it in the length. So now I've established the length of my array. And then I want to execute through that array, and I can tell it what position to start in. Well, I don't want to start in position 0 because I've already printed out the student name. So I'm going to say for index in range 1 to length. So I'm going to go from position 1 to whatever the length of the array is. And it says index, so that's what I'm using for my variable in the, for my counter in my array. So I set sum GPA, which starting out is at 0. So I say 0 plus whatever's in GPA sub 1. So I look and that's 3.4. So now sum GPA is 3.4. And I also print that value out. And I didn't require you to do that. It's just kind of a good thing to put that in so that you can see that you're reading each one of these in. And then I subtract 1 from length at the bottom of my loop, so that I can go back. That's after I actually drop out of my loop. And the reason I subtract 1 is because that's the number that I want to divide the sum GPA by to get the average. Because you remember, our length is going to be the total length, including the 0, and I don't want this one to be part of the average. So I calculate the average, then I call the function display message, and I pass my average value. So I go up here, I pass it to the function, it goes through my if-else's and creates a string variable called note that will come back and be dumped into MSG, and then it prints that message out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run it. Do you guys have any questions so far?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
No.
No? All right, great. Okay, so I can't find where I lost my... All right, so let's go up to run module. And it did print out the name. And with these particular values, which you understand are not the first ones I gave you, because the first ones I gave you would have come up with no message. So it come up with Dean's list. If I wanted to run it again, I could change this file where maybe it'll come up with no message. Let's go in here and take some of these high values out. And it might come out with, let me see, file, save. Okay, let's run it again and see what happens. Yes, and there it came out with no message, so that means it was between 3.5 and 2.0 in the middle. All right, so if there's no questions about that one, let's look then at, I think I put 3 examples in the folder. This one is the second one, I believe, that uses modules. And so let me show you how this one was done. This was a student that used the modules which we discussed in Chapter 6, but it was not a requirement. And so he took the actual function that I gave to you and created a module out of it, and all he did was use it. He has this one, which I gave to you, and then he created one called GPA calculation. Let me open that one so you can, oops, I didn't mean to do it that way. Let me open it with idle. Okay, so this is another module that he imports. So his main program, that's what this whole thing is called, main.py. It uses that non-qualifying name. That's why he says from T2 function, which was the py file that I gave you, import display message, which was that function, as DIS. So he's just given it a different name. He didn't want it to be this long of a name when he called it. So down here he calls it, and he also inside, which is done first, he calls this program GPA calc, import as GPA calc as CALC. So he's going to call the other function and pass the GP sub 0 to it, I guess is what it is, print GP. So that is actually, where did he calculate? Okay, because he calculates the average up here. So in his program, the GPA calc is what actually calculates the average. So it's called calc GP. So he passes this array after he printed out the first position of it. So he did his a little different where he printed. He initializes the GP array, then he initialized, this is his switch, like called NA, and he still uses a 0 and a 1 like I did, only he just calls his little variable NA his Boolean variable. So he says for-line in student, which is what he opened this and read it into a file call, or a variable called student. So he says if NA is the same as 0, then append line to GP and then set the switch to 1. Elif, and so the second time through, if it's equal to 1, then append that value, next value as float, then print out the name, and then make the call to the calculation and pass that array. So if we go back to where that's at so you can see it. So what he does, he passes the GPA, he calculates the length of the GPA, then he initializes a 0. So this part is basically like what mine was. It's just done in a module that he imports in, and then he makes his calls differently, because once he gets that return average GPA, then that value is in these parentheses, and that's what's given to the display message. So it goes into AVG and it goes through this routine and should come out with the, now his file should be the original one, I believe. So let me go back to the main. So his should be calling the original student data, which should come up with no message. Oh, I must have lost his file. Let me see. As I bet it didn't find the... No, there it is. Why it's not running now? Huh. I've had that on a while. Maybe it... There we go. So he also printed out the average, but he used the original function that didn't have anything if it fell in between 3.5 and 2.0. So the average was 3.24, so it didn't make Dean's List and it didn't make probation, so there was no message at all printed out. Okay, you guys have any questions about that one?
No.
Okay, so next, the last one, I think I did, let me go over, I think it's the one from, and just so it'll show on the video too where all these examples are. Let's see, this is, some people are coming on at 8 o'clock, I think, so they won't have to now. Okay, this, oh, this is the wrong. I thought I already put them in there. Yeah, they are. Okay, so the other one, yeah, I thought I did hit that one, is JW. Let me get it. This one, what this student did is he actually used his own function from the previous test that he wrote. So he didn't use my function, and he started out by declaring 2 constant variables, and those were used in his function. And then he also put a message out even if it didn't fall into either one. But he basically opened his array, opened the file student.dat.txt, but he didn't have to use the encoding because his file, he rewrote it. Let me see if it looks just like what mine was, but he had trouble with the new line, so he went in and recoded it. See if I can get it over here. And so then he put, oh, here's something though that he did that nobody else, he looked up these functions in the library, and it's a pretty cool function. I didn't even know it existed either. but you can try to put, like it'll come in here for line in file, array append line, and then it says try float line equals line. So if the first position, which is Sam Davis, is not a float value, then what happens is it says accept value error and then set line equal to name. So it's saying if you can't do it as a float, then set it to name. And if it's a float in string type line, so in the array, if it is a float, then add it to sum. And so then GPA equals sum divided by length of array minus 1. Message equals, and here he does the call to his function, passing the average, and then it tests for which one it falls into, prints out the name, the average, and the student status. So if I run this one, so his actually printed out the GPA. That was the first one I gave, 3.24, and it said nothing exemplary for the message. So now, Kevin, did you turn one in?
Negative.
Negative, okay. So, what about you, Julia? Did you turn a test in?
Yes, I did. He's not
okay, do you want to look at you want us to look at yours?
It's not good for nothing.
Not good coding, is that what you said?
No.
Okay. All right, but if you turn something in, what I can now, is this the only one, Kevin, that you didn't turn one in? Did you do test 1 and 2?
Yeah, this is the only thing we've done that I've had any issues with at all.
Okay, great. So what will happen is we'll take one more test and then the final, and either I'll drop one or I'll have the final replace one of them, whichever way helps the students the most. So the final one will not, will not be like this one exactly. But the main thing that I wanted you to see too is just how to read in a file, put it in an array, and see, a lot of times files do have a mixture of values in them of different data types, and so that was that was the tricky part, was reading in the name and then the float values. So if you'll look those over, and then if you have any other questions, then we can you can email me on those. But let me look and show you. Have either one of you all started Chapter 7, read it?
No, not yet.
No?
We can hear you.
Windows was first developed. It was the first graphical user interface for the PC, but the first ones to actually create the graphical user interface was on the Mac, and they were the first ones to have a drag and drop and the first ones to have a mouse. And then Microsoft, Bill Gates decided they had to get in on the show, so they created Windows. And so what we've been doing so far is we just ask for input, or we read a file in. Well, the actual way that's handled now in programs is by having more of a buttons and event handlers and things like that. So that's what this chapter is about, how to build a graphical user interface. And so if you look at the next, let me enlarge this a little bit, the next page, what is assigned in this chapter is that there's a Headfirst TVN is a station, and this, even though this is a hypothetical kind of a silly problem, these program requirements are actually what happens when you're given a job. Is you're told by your client, okay, this is what I want the program to do, and then you need to figure out programmatically how to do it. But this one also goes into some actual pseudocode in the book, the way they do pseudocode, which is a little different than the way I did it in my old book. But it doesn't matter. Pseudocode is just, the purpose of it is for me to see and for you to know, when you look at a problem, can I logically step through it? Not, do I know the Python syntax to do it? That's not as big of a question as, can I logically do what they want me to do? And then we use Python to apply that to see if our logic was correct. But what they want you to do here is to write a program that a television host can use, and the program is to do the following. You've had a few conversations with the television host and determined a list of program requirements. The host wants to be prompted after a question has been asked to press either 1 for a correct answer or 2 for a wrong answer. Based on the key pressed, an appropriate sound effect needs to play. The program needs to remember how many answers were correct and how many were wrong. So the host will end the quiz by pressing 0. Then the program will display the number of right, wrong, and asked questions. So this is pretty straightforward logic, and they want you on the next page to code the pseudocode for it. So we're going to look at the actual pseudocode here, and this will be the last thing we do. But what it asks us is the host wants these 3 values at the end of the program to print out. So he wants to know the number asked, so there's a variable, number correct, another variable, and a number wrong. And so we're initializing all these to 0 so that we know that we start out with no value in these. Then you would begin the program by asking the host to make a choice. And these are the parts of a loop that we need to remember, regardless of what language or scripting language we're writing in. A loop always has what's called an initialize, where you initialize the variable that's going to be tested in your loop to determine loop or not. And then at the bottom of the loop, question? Oh no, somebody's coming in. At the bottom of the loop, you should ask the same thing that you did before you entered the loop. Because you know what would happen if you don't ask down here? What would happen if this response stays 1 or 2? What happens to my loop? Do I ever give it a chance to get out of the loop? If I don't do this and ask and tell the user they have to put in a 0 to end, this loop would go on indefinitely. You see that? So if I set it up here, say to 1, when I come into the loop, it says while the host response is not 0, and so it's 1, and I drop in this if statement, and I forget to put this in my loop, then it'll keep going up here and say, oh, it's still not 0. So I do this again. Oh, still not 0. Do it again. So there's no way to get out of the loop if I'm not sure to put my increment or my reestablish my variable down here. So those 3 things in the while loop are very important. The initialize, the loop test, and then to always either increment or a counter or give the option for the user to change it. And then at the very end, all I do is display the values of those 3 variables. Okay, any questions? All right, then this little conversation basically says that you have to write code that is compatible across all operating systems, whether it's Windows, OS X, or Linux. And the sound effect is the one that gives us a little bit of trouble because there's no sound effect in Python. So they tell you here to download Pygame, which has some sound effects in it, but that's a big hassle. So I had a student that had found a sound effect that's a Python file called vlc.py, and I put it in Evernote for you. But on Thursday, let's see if I can get past the next page without flipping real fast. So here's where he says to stop and download Pygame and do all of these steps. Don't do this because it will take you a while and it still may not work on your computer. So we go to the next page, and this is where we'll start on Thursday in my lecture class, and hopefully I'll be more successful in recording it this time. And then we'll use the vlc.py, and in Evernote I've placed that as a download right here. And so you can go ahead and go through all of Chapter 7, and hopefully on Thursday we'll take care of this, and then there will be a quiz. Oh no, I was telling you all we're going to wait and do it over 7 and 8. So that's the problem that I want you to work on, and to read Chapter 7 before you watch the Thursday lecture, okay? And I believe that's it, if you guys don't have any questions. Oh, I see Brian came in too, and Aaron. Did you guys just get here? Oh, Jeremy was here. He's gone again, though. Okay, you guys that came in later, do you all have any questions? I recorded what I did. I did Evernote. I went through the 3 examples that are in D2L of test number 3. Let everyone know that if you didn't put a test number 3 up, you'll have an opportunity to either your final will take the place of it. I haven't decided whether I'll do that or drop one of the lowest score. So that if you can understand those examples, then that's really great, because that will be what we'll use in our next test on the GUIs. I got here, David. Okay, great, Aaron. All right, so I just kind of felt bad that my recording didn't work, so I wanted to at least, and it makes it easier to record if I have some students in there. So if there's not any questions, then I'll let you guys go, and then this will, oh, you said, Kevin, about Chapter 6, Quiz 6. Okay, it still didn't show up in your D2L, because in my D2L, it's showing, and I know some students took it, so I'm not sure what's happening. Are you refreshing? Like mine shows right over here that Chapter 6 availability ends April 16th at 11:59 p.m. That's since I reopened it.
Yeah, I see that now. But I was just saying, back then when I sent you that screenshot showing you the log of everything I've had over the past week, Chapter 6 wasn't there. Because usually, of course, I get a notice when a quiz is ending, and that's usually when I remind myself to jump on it. But I didn't see anything for Chapter 6, so I completely ignored it.
Huh. Yeah, because it should have, I didn't change where it was supposed to display in the calendar, but you may have, I didn't put it up until Sunday, I believe, and then it ended at 9:30 this morning. So it should have shown that, but I'm not sure what happened on yours. But anyway, in any event, I opened it back up, so shouldn't be a problem there. All righty, I will, hopefully y'all can watch for that lecture to be recorded, and then you can watch it whenever it's convenient for you on the rest of Chapter 7 then. Thanks for coming. See you guys later.
Appreciate it.